Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, not to a glorious battlefield or a royal court, but to the dusty, crowded streets of the mid-14th century. We're going to walk side by side with the people who lived through the most terrifying pandemic in human history, the Black Death. You'll smell the wood smoke from the hearths, hear the lowing of the cattle, feel the rough wool of your tunic against your skin. This is a journey that will show you the fragility of life and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. And honestly, you're probably lucky you won't survive the end of this one. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and local time. It's a small thing, but it's always cool to see how far we all are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're a villager in a small English town, or maybe a merchant's apprentice in a bustling Italian city. The year is 1346, and for you, life is, for the most part, a predictable cycle of seasons and feasts. It's a world of immense hardship, sure. You've seen your share of tragedy. A brutal winter that took a few of the elderly. A bad harvest that meant hunger. Or a fever that claimed a couple of your neighbor's children. Life expectancy isn't great, maybe around 35 years if you're lucky, and that's a mainstream historical fact you've just accepted as the natural order of things. You don't have to worry about a flu season or a pandemic, because every season is a fight against some illness or other. Your world is local. The biggest news is often from the next village over, and news from 100 miles away is the stuff of sailors' tales and gossip. You spend your days toiling in the fields, weaving cloth, or haggling for a few coins at the market. Your concerns are tangible: the weather, the price of grain, the health of your family. You believe in God, the saints, and the power of the local healer, who might offer you a poultice of herbs and spiderwebs for a wound. You believe the stars and planets govern your fate, and your local priest tells you stories of the coming of the Antichrist. But these are abstract fears, not things that keep you awake at night. The world you inhabit is incredibly interconnected, even if you don't realize it. The wool you shear from your sheep might end up as cloth on the back of a noble in Florence, sold by a merchant who traveled from a distant port. The spices in your meager stew, pepper, ginger, cinnamon, they've all made a long journey from the east, through the Silk Roads and across the seas. And it's this very web of commerce, this silent, invisible network of trade routes, that is about to become your greatest enemy. For now, though, it's just the backdrop to your existence, a quirky tidbit of your world. In some places, they believe that if you ate a specific type of bread baked with ashes on a certain holy day, it would ward off all fevers for the coming year. It's a quaint superstition that offers comfort, a tiny ritual in a vast, unpredictable world. You live and die by such small acts of faith and hope. But a whisper is starting to travel along those very same trade routes. A whisper that's hard to believe. Sailors and merchants who have journeyed to the Black Sea ports are bringing back tales of a strange and terrible sickness. They speak of a plague in the East, in China and India, a disease so violent it kills entire villages in mere days. A pestilence that has followed the Mongol armies as they swept across the lands, leaving death in their wake. Of course, you scoff at this. It's just another tall tale meant to fill a quiet tavern with breathless listeners. You've heard of plagues before, but they are localized. They kill some people, sure, but they don't threaten to undo the very fabric of society. This feels different, but you can't quite grasp why. The sheer scale is impossible to comprehend. Historians still argue whether these early tales were widely known or dismissed as pure fiction. It's hard to imagine anyone believing such a thing, especially when the sun is shining and the harvest is coming in. But the whispers are getting louder. Merchants from the east arrive with haunted eyes. They tell stories not of great riches, but of ghost ships, their sails torn, their crews gone, save for a few sick men who don't survive long after docking. You notice the absence of certain faces in the market. The Italian traders who usually come through in the spring are nowhere to be seen. You start to hear names you've never heard before. Kaffa, a city far away on the Black Sea, where a plague-ridden army reportedly catapulted diseased bodies over the city walls. It sounds like a grim fantasy, a story from the pages of a macabre book. You try to push it out of your mind. You have a field to plow, a meal to make, a family to care for. You can't worry about some far-off plague. But as the autumn winds begin to blow, bringing with them a chill that feels deeper than just the change of season, you can't help but feel a growing sense of dread, a quiet, almost imperceptible tension in the air. The world, your world, is about to change forever. You've left your quiet village now, carried by the currents of trade and rumor to a vibrant port city like Messina on the island of Sicily. It's the autumn of 1347. The air here is thick with the scent of salt water, spices, and 1,000 different human activities. You stand on the docks, watching as ships from all over the Mediterranean come and go, their holds filled with silk from the Orient and wine from Italy. This is the heartbeat of the known world, and you feel its pulse in the rhythmic creak of ropes and the cries of gulls. You feel safe here, surrounded by so much life, so much commerce. This is civilization at its peak. But then, a fleet of ships sails into the harbor, not with the usual pomp and color, but with a strange, foreboding silence. Their sails are tattered, their flags hang limp, and there's a quiet, ghostly stillness about them that makes the hairs on your arms stand up. Your gut clenches. Something is wrong. As they dock, a few of the more daring port officials board the ships, expecting to find the usual cargo, but what they discover is pure horror. The ships are floating tombs. Most of the crew is dead, their bodies lying in heaps on the decks, already bloated and discolored. The few sailors who are still alive are barely clinging to life, delirious with fever, their skin covered in grotesque swellings the size of eggs or apples. These were the buboes, and they would soon become a universal, terrifying symbol. A mainstream historical fact. These ships, which are believed to have come from the city of Kaffa on the Black Sea, brought the plague directly to the port of Messina in October 1347. They weren't just carrying sick men, they were carrying the true architects of this catastrophe, a teeming population of fleas, who lived on the rats that had also made the journey. The rats were just as vulnerable to the plague as the humans, dying in droves. But as the rats died, the fleas, starving, jumped ship. They didn't care about your silks or your spices. They were looking for a new host. You watch as they, tiny and unseen, leap from the dead animals and onto the legs of the sailors, the dock workers, and even onto you. You brush at an itch on your ankle, completely oblivious to the microscopic passenger that has just found a new home. The city officials, in a desperate attempt to contain this unknown menace, order the ships to be turned away. They are to leave the harbor and sink to the bottom of the sea if necessary. But it's already too late. The plague has already disembarked. It's now living in the docks, in the storerooms, and it's being carried on the clothing of the people who boarded those ships. You see a man, a dock worker who was among the first to board, now stumbling through the streets, his face pale and his body racked with shivers. He collapses in a marketplace, and people rush to his side. You can almost hear the tiny, silent biological clock starting to tick. This is the moment the door opens, and the monster steps through. A quirky tidbit of the time, and a belief that would shape so much of the response to come, was the miasma theory, the idea that the plague was caused by bad air or a foul, corrupted atmosphere. You'd already be accustomed to foul smells, the unwashed crowds, the open sewers, the general lack of sanitation. But now, a new kind of fear is born. People begin carrying bouquets of flowers or fragrant herbs, like lavender and rosemary, believing that the sweet scent would purify the air and protect them from the sickness. You might even crush a clove of garlic in your hand, its pungent smell a small comfort against the imagined stench of the plague. It's a small, almost pitiful attempt to fight an invisible enemy, but it's all you have. As the days turn into weeks, the pace of life in the city begins to change. The market is less crowded. The faces you've grown accustomed to seeing, the fishmonger, the baker, the local priest, are suddenly absent, and you begin to see the same terrifying swellings on the necks and in the groins of your friends and neighbors. You hear the stories, whispered in dark corners, about people who were perfectly healthy in the morning, but dead by nightfall. The city's cemeteries are filling up faster than they can be dug. The bodies are so numerous that they're being dumped into mass graves. It's in these early, frantic days that people begin to understand that this is not a normal fever or a seasonal sickness. This is something far more sinister, far more powerful. And historians still debate whether the pneumonic form of the plague, which could be spread from person to person through coughs and sneezes, was as significant in this first wave as the more common bubonic form. Regardless of the exact mechanism, the outcome is the same. The plague has found its footing in Europe. It's here, and it's not leaving anytime soon. And in your heart, you know that the peaceful, predictable world you once knew is gone forever. The whispers have become screams. The rumors from the East are now a lived reality on your very doorstep. The first person you know to get sick is perhaps a neighbor, a family member, or a close friend. You watch, helpless, as the first signs appear. It begins with a sudden chill, a fever that grips the body with an almost supernatural intensity. They shiver uncontrollably, even huddled under the thickest wool blankets. Their skin grows hot to the touch, their eyes glassy and distant. This fever is not a normal one that you might sweat out. This is a fever that consumes you, a fire within. Then, the truly terrifying part of the sickness reveals itself. A grotesque swelling appears on the body, usually in the armpit, the groin, or on the neck. This is a mainstream historical fact. These are the buboes, and they are the namesake of the bubonic plague. They are swollen lymph nodes, growing to the size of a pigeon's egg or an apple, hot and excruciatingly painful. You can see them beneath the skin, a dark, angry mound. They throb with a life of their own, and for the sick, the pain is unbearable. The buboes are a sign, a mark of death that seems almost inevitable. As the disease progresses, the patient begins to vomit, often blood. Dark black splotches appear under the skin, a sign that the body is shutting down. This is where the name Black Death truly comes from the dark, bruised marks of death itself. What makes this plague so much more terrifying than anything you have ever known is its speed. A person can be walking through the market, healthy and whole in the morning, and be dead by sunset. You witness it with your own eyes. A man you just spoke to, who complained of a slight headache, is found stiff and cold in his bed just hours later. It's a relentless, pitiless process that leaves no time for goodbyes, no time for comfort. It's a complete and total biological assault. In this reality, every cough, every sneeze, every slight twinge of pain becomes a potential death sentence. You start to look at everyone around you with suspicion, wondering if they are next, or if you yourself are already carrying the microscopic harbinger of death within you. The local healers and barbers, who also serve as doctors, are completely at a loss. They try what they know. They attempt to balance the humors with bloodletting, opening a vein to let the bad blood out. They try herbal remedies, strange tinctures made from potent roots and flowers. But nothing works. The sickness laughs at their feeble attempts. You might hear of a quirky tidbit of a remedy that sounds utterly insane, but in this time of despair, people will try anything. They believe that applying a live chicken with its feathers plucked to the buboes will draw the sickness out. The theory, as absurd as it sounds now, was that the chicken would become infected and die, taking the sickness with it. These are the kinds of desperate, useless acts you see people clinging to. A final, futile attempt to beat back the darkness. This isn't just about the physical sickness. It's about the complete breakdown of human compassion. The sheer terror makes people abandon their own families. A mother might leave her sick child. A husband might flee from his wife. Your world becomes a place where the sick are left to die alone, their bodies often rotting in their homes because no one dares to touch them. The stench of death hangs over everything. The normal rhythms of life are gone. No one is singing, no one is laughing. You walk through the streets and hear nothing but the wails of the sick and the somber tolling of church bells, which ring for the dead with a frequency that is both numbing and terrifying. The death toll is catastrophic. People are dying in such large numbers that there's no time for proper burials. Mass graves are dug outside the city walls, giant pits where bodies, stripped of their belongings, are thrown in by the hundreds, piled on top of each other like firewood. Historians still debate the precise mortality rate, but estimates range from 30% to as high as 60% of Europe's population in this first wave alone. That's not just a statistic. That's a world turned upside down. That's more than half of the people you know, gone forever. You look around at the dwindling numbers of familiar faces, at the empty houses and silent streets, and you begin to feel a deep, chilling loneliness. The disease is not just killing individuals, it is killing communities. It is killing the very idea of a safe and stable world. And this is just the beginning. The sheer brute force of the disease has left you and your world reeling. But in the midst of this unending horror, the human mind instinctively seeks to understand. Why is this happening? You're not just grieving. You're looking for a reason, a purpose behind the meaningless death. And in the 14th century, the explanations you find are not rooted in science, but in a mixture of faith, philosophy, and pure superstition. You're desperate for a narrative, a villain to blame, or a lesson to be learned from this monstrous punishment. The most overwhelming explanation you hear, and one promoted by the Church, is that the plague is divine punishment. This is a mainstream historical fact that shaped the entire response to the pandemic. People, from the lowest peasant to the highest noble, believed that God was punishing humanity for its sins. The world had become too greedy, too lustful, too arrogant, and now God was cleaning house with a force far greater than any army. This belief permeates every aspect of your life. The streets are filled with people on their knees, begging for forgiveness. Churches are overflowing with the faithful, and the sound of confession is a constant, mournful hum. You see self-flagellants, groups of people who travel from town to town, whipping themselves with leather scourges to atone for their sins, and, they hope, for the sins of all humanity. Their processions are a grim and terrifying spectacle, their backs raw and bloody, their chants of repentance filling the air with a desperate plea for mercy. But there's also a more intellectual, though equally flawed, explanation for the disaster. The scholars and physicians of the day, using their best understanding of the world, put forward the miasma theory. They believed the plague was caused by foul, corrupted air, a miasma that was released by a rare and terrible alignment of the planets. They talk of Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars aligning in a way that had poisoned the very atmosphere. This idea that the air itself was tainted explains why you see people constantly trying to purify it. You see them burning aromatic woods like juniper and rosemary in the streets, believing the sweet smoke will cleanse the air and drive the sickness away. A quirky tidbit you might come across is a person wearing a plague amulet, a small piece of parchment with a prayer or a specific symbol etched on it, which they believe will offer them personal protection against the tainted air. These amulets are a blend of faith and magic, a small personal shield against a cosmic evil. These explanations, while offering a semblance of order to the chaos, also fuel a growing paranoia. If the plague is divine punishment, then there must be a reason why God is so angry. And if it's the air, then maybe someone has poisoned the air. You start to look around at your neighbors with a newfound suspicion. You hear talk that it must be the work of heretics or people who practice witchcraft. A simple disagreement, a long-held grudge, is now interpreted through the lens of sin and divine retribution. You might even find yourself looking at the local tavern keeper, who is known for his drinking, and wondering if his sins are the reason for your own suffering. This is the moment when fear starts to curdle into something truly vile: blame. The terror and helplessness are a fertile ground for conspiracies to grow. People are no longer just afraid of the sickness. They are afraid of each other. The search for a culprit begins to outweigh the search for a cure. Historians still debate the extent to which these beliefs were genuinely held by the masses versus promoted by the clergy and learned men to maintain social control in the face of such anarchy. But regardless of the intent, the result is the same. Society starts to fracture along lines of suspicion and hate. The plague has stripped away the veneer of civilization, revealing the raw, primal fear that lies beneath. And in that fear, a new kind of sickness is born, one that turns a person's gaze not to the heavens for a cure, but to their neighbor for a scapegoat. The stage is set for a new horror, not of sickness, but of hatred. And you can feel it brewing in the cold, still air. With prayer and piety failing to save your dying loved ones, and the stars offering no tangible relief, the world turns to a different kind of desperation. It's not a spiritual battle anymore. It's a physical one, and people are ready to try anything, no matter how strange, gruesome, or absurd, to fight the sickness that is consuming them. You see the fear turn into a frantic search for a miracle cure, and the landscape of your society is now littered with charlatans, folk healers, and desperate souls peddling their wild, unsubstantiated remedies. Hope becomes a commodity, and it is sold dearly. One of the most widespread and trusted medical practices of the time, a mainstream historical fact, was bloodletting, based on the ancient theory of the four humors, that the body's health was a balance of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. The physicians of the day believed the plague was caused by an excess of blood or some other humor. Their solution was to cut a vein and drain out what they believed was the contaminated fluid. You watch as a barber, who also performs simple surgical procedures, opens a gash on an infected person's arm, letting the blood flow into a bowl. The theory was that this would release the sickness. Of course, all it does is weaken an already frail patient, often making their death come faster. You see people applying leeches to the buboes, hoping the hungry worms will suck the sickness right out. It's a gory, futile practice that only adds to the suffering. Other remedies were even more bizarre. In an effort to sweat out the sickness, people would sit in a sealed room with a fire, trying to endure the unbearable heat. Some would cover themselves in concoctions of herbs, crushed flowers, and vinegar. Others would resort to remedies that are so repulsive they're hard to imagine, like applying a paste of human excrement or urine to the buboes. The sheer horror and desperation of these acts show just how far people were willing to go. You see people drinking strange potions, some made from ground-up snakes or toads, believing that the poison in one could neutralize the poison in the other. It's a dark comedy of errors, with life and death as the stakes. Then there's the truly fantastical. A quirky tidbit of these desperate times was the belief in the healing power of precious stones. The most popular was the powdered emerald. You would crush a precious emerald, if you were wealthy enough to own one, into a fine dust and then mix it into a drink. The belief was that the stone's inherent magical properties would fight the disease from within. The notion is so bizarre it almost makes you laugh, but for the people of that time, it was a genuine, last-ditch effort. A family might sell all their worldly possessions just to buy a single gem, hoping it would save a dying child. The tragedy is that the emerald, of course, did nothing, and the family would be left with nothing, their hope and their fortune gone. The people who profit from this misery are the charlatans and quacks. These opportunistic entrepreneurs, with their loud voices and flashy clothes, set up stalls in the market, selling their own secret cures for an exorbitant price. They might sell a flask of colored water, claiming it's a potion of the angels, or a simple root, claiming it was blessed by a saint. You see them prey on the grieving and the terrified, promising a miracle that never comes. But in a world where God seems to have abandoned you, and all known medicine has failed, you can't blame people for clinging to any glimmer of hope, no matter how false. The greatest tragedy of all is that the medical community, bound by their rigid and flawed beliefs, was largely incapable of helping. Historians still argue whether the medical community's rigid adherence to outdated theories actually made the situation worse than if they had done nothing at all. Their cures were often painful, dangerous, and served only to accelerate death, not prevent it. You watch as a community elder, who was once a respected figure, dies from bloodletting, his strength drained from him. The realization slowly dawns on you. There is no cure. There is no amulet, no potion, no magic stone that can save you. The plague, with its unrelenting force, has made a mockery of all your beliefs and all your remedies. The only way to survive is to abandon these futile efforts and find a new strategy. a strategy not of healing, but of avoidance. And that is where the real fight for survival begins. When all the prayers have been prayed and all the remedies have failed, a new primal instinct takes over. It's the most powerful of all survival tactics. You run. You realize with a cold, terrifying certainty that there is no fighting the plague. The only way to survive is to be somewhere else. The cities, with their crowded streets and festering filth, have become death traps. The air feels heavy, thick with the stench of sickness and decay, and the only path to safety seems to lie beyond the city gates. You're a part of the great exodus. The roads out of the city, which were once bustling with merchants and travelers, are now a single file, frantic river of humanity. You walk with a small bag of your most precious belongings, your family by your side, your face a mask of determination and fear. The carts of the wealthy, piled high with furniture and valuables, lumber past you, drawn by exhausted oxen. It's a mainstream historical fact that the rich and powerful were often the first to flee, retreating to their isolated country estates where they hoped to escape the human-to-human contact that was proving so fatal. For you, a common person, your destination is less certain. Perhaps a distant relative's farm, or just anywhere that isn't here. You walk with a feeling of profound loneliness, even surrounded by so many people, because you know you are all running from the same thing, and the plague is a patient hunter. But your escape is not so simple. As you approach the next town or village, you're met with suspicion. The locals have heard the rumors, and they look at you as if you are carrying the sickness on your clothes. Some towns will simply close their gates, leaving you to wait outside, an exile from a dying world. Other places will allow you in, but only after a period of watchful waiting. This is one of the earliest, most instinctual forms of quarantine. People begin to realize that a healthy-looking person from an infected city could still be a carrier, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. The plague has turned everyone, even the innocent, into a potential threat. As you travel, you hear rumors of people who have found a way to resist the plague. One quirky tidbit, which is almost certainly a legend, is the story of the 4 thieves' vinegar. The tale goes that a group of thieves in Marseille would rob the homes of the dead without getting sick. When they were finally caught, they revealed their secret in exchange for a lighter sentence. They rubbed themselves with a concoction of vinegar, garlic, rosemary, and other herbs. They believed this strong-smelling potion protected them from the miasma of the plague. You hear this story, and you wonder, desperate for any shred of hope, if there's any truth to it. The idea of a magic potion is so much more comforting than the reality that some people just get lucky. The irony of this mass migration is a cruel one. By fleeing, people are not escaping the plague. They are carrying it to new, unsuspecting places. The isolated villages that once felt so safe are now infected by the refugees from the cities. The plague, which started in a few major ports, is now spreading across the entire continent, a wildfire fanned by the very people trying to escape its flames. You might arrive at a remote farming community only to see the first person fall sick a week later, a dark shadow you brought with you, a consequence you never intended. This is the tragic and unavoidable reality of this pandemic. Historians still debate the effectiveness of these early quarantine measures. Were they a successful tactic that saved lives, or a futile gesture that came too late? The truth is probably a bit of both. For some, isolation was a lifesaver. For others, it was an impossibility. For most, The plague was a relentless force that you could not outrun. As you walk, you feel more alone than ever. You are no longer part of a village or a community. You are just a survivor, a single human being in a vast, terrifying world. And in this new, fragmented reality, the old rules, the old bonds of society are beginning to break down completely. The old world is dying, and the new one is not yet born, and you are caught somewhere in the terrifying middle. The world has been stripped of its illusions. The cities are empty. The roads are filled with refugees, and the promise of a peaceful life is a distant memory. But what's dying even faster than the people is their faith. The plague doesn't discriminate. It kills the pious just as easily as it kills the sinner. And in this terrifying reality, your relationship with God, once a source of comfort and stability, has become a source of profound existential dread. The old certainties are gone, and what's left is a gaping void where hope used to be. The most shocking thing you witness is the collapse of the church itself. A mainstream historical fact of the Black Death is the shockingly high mortality rate among the clergy. Monks, nuns, and parish priests, in their duty to care for the sick and administer last rites, were on the front lines of the pandemic. They lived and worked in close quarters, making them incredibly vulnerable. The result? In some dioceses, more than half of the clergy died. You see the bell tower of your local church, once a symbol of constancy, now silent. The priest who baptized you is gone. His replacement, a young man who knows little, is too terrified to visit the sick. The sacraments, which you believe are the path to salvation, are no longer available. People are dying alone, without confession, without last rites, and in the prevailing belief of the time, their souls are in peril, destined for an eternity in purgatory, or worse. With the official church in disarray, people turn to other, more desperate forms of worship. You've seen the flagellants before, these wild-eyed penitents whipping themselves in the streets, but now their numbers are swelling. They offer a tangible form of atonement, a way to physically punish yourself for the sins of the world, and you see people drawn to their cause out of sheer, unadulterated terror. They march from town to town, their chants and bloody rituals a constant reminder that God is angry and must be appeased. This is a religious movement, born of desperation, a last-ditch effort to perform some act, any act, that might spare you from the fate that is claiming everyone else. It's not about faith anymore. It's about a frantic, agonizing plea for mercy. The fear of dying unprepared gives rise to a quirky tidbit of the time, the creation of plague wills. People, terrified of dying suddenly without a proper will, would make them on the fly, sometimes even scratching them onto pieces of wood or stone as they lay dying. They would leave their meager possessions to the church or their remaining family, hoping that this final act of piety would be enough to save their souls. These wills, often written in haste and in fear, are a tangible record of the panic and the profound terror of a world where death is always just around the corner, and the afterlife seems as uncertain as the present. The theological debate of the time is a simple, brutal one. Is God's love unconditional, or is he a vengeful deity who is now actively punishing his creation? Most people in their terror believe the latter. The plague is not a test, it is a judgment, and this belief has a profound and lasting impact. Historians still debate whether the plague was the sole cause of the decline in church authority or simply accelerated a pre-existing trend of disillusionment and reformist thought. But for you, the outcome is the same. The institution that was supposed to be your rock in a turbulent world has crumbled. You are left adrift in a sea of spiritual uncertainty. The moral and social fabric of your world is unraveling. Priests are fleeing, leaving their flocks to fend for themselves. People who once believed in a compassionate God now believe in a wrathful one. In this vacuum of authority and hope, new and dangerous ideas take root. If God is punishing the world, then the reason must be found. The sin must be located, and the sinners must be rooted out. The spiritual crisis has now given way to a need for a human culprit, a visible enemy to blame for the suffering. And as the death toll continues to rise, that need becomes more urgent, more dangerous, and more violent with every passing day. The prayers have gone unanswered. The remedies have failed. God's wrath, as you and so many others believe, continues to rain down upon you. But in this maelstrom of fear and incomprehensible death, the human mind craves a simple, tangible explanation. It's no longer enough to believe in an angry God or corrupted air. The need for a living, breathing culprit, someone to blame, becomes an overwhelming, corrosive force. And in the dark heart of this pandemic, that need finds a target: the people who look and live differently. The seeds of suspicion you saw planted are now blooming into a terrible and violent harvest. The rumors start subtly, whispered in hushed tones in the market. The plague isn't natural, someone says. It's a plot. The theory, born of a terrified imagination, is simple and monstrous. Someone is poisoning the wells. This is the single simple answer that so many desperately want to believe. It gives them a reason for the senseless death and an enemy they can see and fight. And as the fear intensifies, the finger of blame points squarely at the Jewish communities. They are a minority in your society, living in segregated quarters, often with different customs and beliefs. They are an easy, pre-existing scapegoat for a world that has gone mad. You hear stories of Jews caught in the act of poisoning the water supply. These tales, almost certainly invented, spread like wildfire across the continent, fueled by panic and centuries of built-up prejudice. The accusations are absurd on their face. The Jewish people were dying from the plague at the same rate as everyone else, but logic has no place in this world of terror. The people believe what they need to believe, and what they need to believe is that they are not powerless, and that their suffering has a human cause that can be eliminated. This persecution is a mainstream historical fact that resulted in one of the darkest chapters of the Black Death. Across Europe, particularly in the German lands of the Holy Roman Empire, a wave of pogroms and massacres sweeps through cities. You hear a chilling report from a city like Strasbourg, where in 1349, the entire Jewish community, numbering in the thousands, was rounded up, taken to the cemetery, and burned alive. This violence is not a crime committed by a few. It is a mass hysteria, a mob mentality fueled by the terrifying belief that they are doing God's work, purging the world of a great evil. You watch as neighbor turns on neighbor, as a community you thought was stable and peaceful descends into a bloodthirsty frenzy. Amidst this chaos, there is a voice of reason, though it is one that is largely ignored. A quirky tidbit of this time is that Pope Clement VI, from his palace in Avignon, issued several papal bulls condemning the persecution of the Jews. He stated clearly that those who blamed them were seduced by that liar, the devil, and he even offered them sanctuary. He pointed out the obvious, that the plague was killing Jewish people too, and that it was also ravaging lands where no Jews lived. But in the face of such overwhelming terror, the Pope's words carried little weight. The populace, gripped by a primal fear, had already made up its mind. The highest spiritual authority in Europe could not stop the tide of hatred. Historians still debate the extent to which these conspiracy theories were genuinely believed by the masses or were actively spread by local authorities as a pretext to seize Jewish property and cancel debts. Was it pure prejudice or a cynical act of economic opportunism hidden beneath a veil of piety and fear? The answer is likely a devastating combination of both. Whatever the motivation, the result is the same: the destruction of innocent lives and the further breakdown of a society already on the brink. You look at the smoke from a distant fire, you hear the distant screams, and you know in your heart that the plague has not only killed the body, it has also poisoned the soul of your world. With communities shattered and mobs turning on one another, a new and unsettling figure begins to emerge from the chaos. You see them from a distance, a silhouette of black leather and dark cloth, and they become a grim, almost mythological symbol of this plague-ridden world. This is the plague doctor. They are summoned by the dying, and their presence is a mix of terror and a final, desperate hope. Their image, forever etched in your mind, is a testament to the era's blend of rational thought and sheer ignorance. You see a doctor approaching a sick neighbor's house, and you instinctively back away. The most striking thing about them is their iconic attire. The long, ankle-length robe, often made of waxed canvas or dark leather, covers them from head to toe. They wear a wide-brimmed hat, long leather gloves, and most famously, a mask with a long, hollow beak. This isn't just a costume, it's a meticulously crafted piece of protection. The beak is stuffed with sweet-smelling herbs and spices, rosemary, mint, cloves, which, in the belief of the time, would filter out the foul, corrupted air, or miasma, that was thought to be carrying the disease. A mainstream historical fact is that while this specific full costume was actually invented later, in the 17th century, by a physician named Charles Delorme, the concept behind it was very much a part of your 14th century world. The belief that sweet scents could ward off sickness was a core idea, and you would have seen early, less elaborate versions of this kind of protective gear. The image of the beaked doctor, in your mind, represents the last bastion of a failing science against a relentless, invisible enemy. As the doctor enters the house, you see them carry a long wooden pointer. This is a quirky tidbit about their practice. They used it to examine patients, prod at buboes, or move objects without making direct physical contact. This was their first, clumsy attempt at what we now call social distancing, a small but poignant acknowledgement of the contagious nature of the disease, even if they didn't fully understand it. The pointer is a symbol of their fear, an extension of their arm that allows them to maintain a physical and psychological barrier between themselves and the grotesque horror inside. Their medical toolkit, sadly, is no better than the folk remedies you've already seen. They are still bound by the ancient theory of the four humors. Their main course of action is to lance the buboes, those swollen, painful lymph nodes, and drain the pus and blood, believing that this would release the poisonous fluids from the body. You hear the screams from within the house as they perform this agonizing procedure, and you know in your heart that it is doing nothing to help. They might prescribe a mix of bizarre herbs or recommend more bloodletting. The plague doctor, for all their intimidating appearance, is just as helpless as the frightened villager. They are, in a sense, selling a kind of false hope, a final ritual for the dying that offers a semblance of control in a world that has none. Yet, despite their ineffectiveness, their presence is profoundly important. They are a professional class, a figure of authority that you can turn to when all else has failed. They are a tragic figure, risking their lives every day for a purpose they barely understand, and with tools that are entirely useless. And historians still debate whether these doctors were driven more by a genuine desire to help or by the high salaries they were able to command from terrified city councils. They were paid handsomely for a job that was almost certain to end in their own death, a contract with both hope and the Grim Reaper. But even the plague doctor, in their elaborate costume of protection, cannot escape the plague's reach. You hear that one of them has died, then another. Their bodies are found in their houses, their beaked masks still full of fragrant flowers, their hands cold and still. And in this ultimate failure, you realize that there is no individual, no class, no profession that is safe from this sickness. No amount of herbs or leather can save you. The old world is not just sick. It is collapsing, and the changes it is bringing are not just medical, but societal, economic, and moral. The real fight for survival is about to begin, not against the sickness, but in its profound and terrible aftermath. The plague, for now, has receded, but it has left behind a world that is eerily, profoundly quiet. The streets, once bustling with the loud noise of human life, are now filled with the whisper of the wind. A third, or maybe even half, of the people you once knew are simply gone. Fields are overgrown with weeds, crops rot on the vine, and the workshops of the artisans sit empty, their tools gathering dust. You walk through your village, and every empty home, every silent church, is a tombstone for a world that no longer exists. But in this devastating vacuum, a strange and unexpected new reality is taking shape. The most profound change is one you can feel in your bones, the value of your labor. Before the plague, you were one of many, a simple peasant, a laborer, a serf, tied to the land and to the will of your lord. Your work was cheap, your life was hard, and you had almost no power. But now, with so many of your fellow workers gone, you are a rare and precious commodity. The demand for labor is immense, but the supply is frighteningly small. Suddenly, you have leverage. You find that you can demand a higher wage. You can ask for better conditions. You can even negotiate to rent land for yourself, something that was unthinkable just a few years ago. This new power dynamic is a seismic shift that fundamentally breaks the old feudal system. That system was built on a pyramid of power, with the lord at the top and an endless supply of peasants to support him. But when the base of that pyramid is decimated, the entire structure begins to shake. The lord of your manor, who once held complete control over your life, now needs you more than you need him. He might threaten you, but he can't force you to work for the same pitiful wages as before, because he knows that if you leave, there's no one to replace you. You hear of peasants leaving their old manors, seeking work in other villages for higher pay, and for the first time in your life, you realize you have a choice. The authorities, of course, do not take this change well. The powerful landowning class is terrified of this new economic reality, where they are no longer in control. A mainstream historical fact is that in England, King Edward III, in response to this, passed a law called the Statute of Laborers in 1351. This law attempted to freeze wages and prices at pre-plague levels. It declared that no one could earn more than they had before the plague, and that every able-bodied person was required to work. It was a desperate attempt to force the world back into the way it was. but for the most part, it failed. You see your neighbors ignoring the law. They demand higher wages anyway, knowing the Lord will pay them, because the alternative is to let his fields lay fallow and starve. The law, passed by men who didn't understand the new world, is little more than a piece of paper. This new reality isn't just about money. It's about property and inheritance. A quirky tidbit of this time is that survivors often found themselves inheriting not just the meager belongings of their family, but also entire homes and small parcels of land from relatives who had no heirs left. A common villager who once owned nothing might suddenly become a person of property, with a home, a garden, and a sense of ownership they could never have dreamed of before. This too contributes to the dismantling of the old social order, as more and more people gain a level of autonomy and independence that was once reserved for a tiny elite. But the new power isn't without its tensions. Historians still debate whether this sudden economic opportunity was a true catalyst for social change, or if the subsequent laws passed by the aristocracy successfully suppressed the peasants' new power for a time. The truth is that the seeds of change were sown, and while the harvest would be a long time coming, the old world of serfdom and unquestioned authority was forever damaged. The survivors, you among them, are living in a new, strange, and terrifyingly empty world, but one where your life and your labor suddenly has a value it never had before. And as you tend to a field that you now have a real stake in, you feel a mixture of profound grief for all that was lost and a quiet, almost forbidden sense of opportunity. The world is slowly rebuilding. Fields are being worked. Villages are once again filled with the sounds of life, and the new economic reality you're living in offers a strange kind of hope. But the scars of the plague run deeper than the empty houses and the mass graves. They have left a profound mark on the human psyche, and you see it reflected in the art and culture that is now emerging. The beautiful, vibrant paintings of saints and angels from the world before the plague have been replaced with something far more somber, more honest, and more terrifying. The most famous and chilling new artistic motif is the danse macabre, or the dance of death. This is a mainstream historical fact, an artistic theme that exploded in popularity across Europe in the years following the Black Death. You see it painted on the walls of a church or carved into a wooden panel, and it instantly makes you stop and stare. The imagery is simple but powerful, a procession of living people, representing all walks of life, are being led to their graves by skeletal figures, by death itself. The living are shown in all their finery, a king in his crown, a pope in his robes, a wealthy merchant with his money bag. But they are all being dragged along by a grinning, bony hand. The message is as stark as it is profound. Death is the great equalizer. The plague, with its brutal indifference, killed the rich and the poor, the powerful and the powerless, the righteous and the sinner. It showed you that no amount of wealth or social status could save you. And this new art captures that truth with a morbid beauty. A quirky tidbit of this art is that the skeletal figures of death are often shown mocking the living, dancing around them with a sinister glee, as if to say, "Your earthly power means nothing to me." The image of a peasant standing side by side with a king, both of them being led to the same grave, is a powerful visual statement in a world that was once built on a strict, rigid social hierarchy. It is a quiet, artistic rebellion against the old order that the plague itself has helped to dismantle. This new cultural mood isn't limited to just paintings. You hear of new poems being written, of stories being told around the fire, all with a dark and fatalistic theme. The old stories of chivalrous knights and courtly love have been replaced by tales of mortality, of the fleeting nature of life, and of the inevitability of death. The philosophical shift is palpable. Before the plague, people saw life as a path to salvation, a journey with a clear divine purpose. Now life feels more like a fragile, temporary gift that can be snatched away at any moment, and the focus is on the fleetingness of existence. You walk through a church and see a painting of a bishop, a symbol of authority, being pulled along by a skeleton. You look at it, and you think of the priests who fled, of the ones who died alongside their flock, and you realize that even their sacred vows offered no protection. The art is not just a reminder of death. It is a commentary on the failures of the institutions and social structures that people once trusted. The plague has not only taken lives, it has also stripped away the illusion of permanence and order. Historians still debate whether this art was meant as a grim reminder of mortality, or a subversive political statement against the inequality of the old world. Was it meant to teach people to live a more pious life, or was it a way for the poor to express a silent, bitter satisfaction that the powerful were just as vulnerable as they were? The answer is probably both, but for you, the survivor, the message is personal. You look at these images and you know that you are living on borrowed time. The plague has passed for now, but the memory of its terror and the certainty of its return hangs over everything like a shroud. You have survived, but you will never again be able to look at the world or at death in the same way. The great wave of death has passed, leaving behind a world that feels both empty and full of a quiet, somber hope. You have survived, but survival isn't a victory. It's a new, heavy burden. The villages are no longer ghost towns, but they are a fraction of what they once were. You see a few new faces, some from other towns, some from the countryside, but mostly you see a smaller, quieter version of the world you once knew. You mourn for the people who are gone, but there's no time to grieve properly. Life has to go on. There are fields to work, homes to repair, and a new, fragile kind of peace to be built. But a shadow hangs over everything. That shadow is the memory of the plague and the constant nagging fear that it will return. Every new cough, every rumor of a fever, every unfamiliar face in the market sends a jolt of panic through you. You're always listening for the sound of the bell, which now feels less like a call to prayer and more like a death knell. The fear isn't as frantic as it was in the first wave. It's a low hum, a constant underlying anxiety that becomes a part of who you are. It's the feeling of walking on thin ice, knowing that at any moment the world could crack open beneath your feet. And crack it does. A mainstream historical fact is that the plague did not disappear after 1351. It returned in subsequent, though usually less severe, waves. You hear the whispers again, the same old stories from the ports. But this time you don't scoff. You know what they mean. A few years after the first wave, the sickness returns. Perhaps it's a merchant ship that docks, or a traveler from a distant land, but the signs are the same. The fever, the buboes, the quick, terrifying death. The pestis secunda, as scholars would later call it, has arrived. But this time, the reaction is different. There is no mass panic, no frantic fleeing that spreads the disease further. There is a grim, heartbreaking acceptance. You and your neighbors know what to do. You isolate the sick. You hold a simple, quick burial for the dead, and you try to keep going. The world has learned to live with the threat. You see people going about their daily lives with a new, quiet determination. The social structures that collapsed in the first wave are more resilient this time. The community doesn't fracture. It huddles together, holding on to what's left. People develop their own small, personal ways of coping. A quirky tidbit is the development of personal rituals, not cures, but small acts of defiance against the plague. You might wear a small pouch of fragrant herbs around your neck. You might say a specific hushed prayer every morning as you leave your home. These aren't meant to save you, not really. They are meant to give you a feeling of control, a small comfort in a world where you have none. It's a way to quiet the constant internal dread and to live in the shadow of death without being completely consumed by it. The psychological toll of this new cyclical reality is immense. You are living in a permanent state of grief. Every time the plague returns, you lose more people, and the memory of the first wave is reinforced. You are a survivor, but you are also a person who has seen more death than a soldier in 100 battles. You have learned to live with loss, to build a life in the quiet spaces between the tragedies. You have grown accustomed to the idea that life is not a steady, unbroken line, but a series of fragile recoveries punctuated by bursts of horrific death. Historians still debate whether these subsequent waves were less virulent or if the survivors of the first wave had developed some form of natural immunity. Was the virus itself getting weaker, or were the people who were left simply stronger? Whatever the reason, the outcome is the same. The plague has cemented its place in your world. It is no longer an anomaly. It is a fact of life. The social and economic changes that were sparked by the first wave are no longer temporary. They are permanent, and they are about to lead to an even greater revolution. The stage has been set not for a religious awakening, not for a medical cure, but for a fundamental reshaping of society itself. The plague has come and gone again, and with each passing wave, the old world seems to crumble just a little bit more. The economic shifts you saw after the first wave, the higher wages, the newfound freedom to move and negotiate, are no longer temporary oddities. They are the new reality. But the powerful, the lords and the kings, are not willing to let go of their authority so easily. They are desperately trying to turn back the clock, and their attempts to reassert control are what will finally break the back of the feudal system for good. You, a survivor who has lost so much but gained a new sense of power, are not going to give it up without a fight. The old ruling class is scared. They see the labor shortages, they see the peasants leaving their manors, and they see their own power and wealth diminishing. In response, they pass more and more restrictive laws, and they impose new, heavier taxes. In England, for example, a new poll tax is levied, a flat tax on every person, rich or poor, regardless of their income. This is a cruel and unfair tax that disproportionately hurts the working class, and it is the spark that finally lights the fuse of a powder keg that has been building for decades. The patience of the peasants, already worn thin by the horrors they've endured, finally runs out. You find yourself swept up in a growing tide of discontent. In the taverns and the fields, people are no longer just complaining. They are talking of action, of a new, fairer world. And their ideas are given a voice by a new kind of leader. A mainstream historical fact is the Peasants' Revolt of 1381 in England, an event that encapsulates this new age of social rebellion. You hear the passionate sermons of a radical priest named John Ball, who travels through the countryside, preaching a message of equality that sounds like heresy to the Lords. He asks a question that reverberates through the hearts of the common people. When Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman? This is a quirky tidbit and a powerful direct quote that perfectly captures the revolutionary spirit. He is saying that in the eyes of God, all people are equal, and that the rigid class system of the world is a man-made perversion. The revolt itself is a chaotic, furious affair, led by a figure named Wat Tyler. Thousands upon thousands of peasants, many of them young men who have never known the old pre-plague world, march on London. They burn the houses of the wealthy and of the tax collectors. They storm the Tower of London and kill some of the king's officials, making their demands known to the young King Richard II himself. They want an end to serfdom. They want an end to the oppressive taxes. They want a new, more just world. It's a moment of pure, unadulterated revolution, a direct challenge to centuries of established power. The revolt, of course, is eventually and brutally suppressed. Wat Tyler is killed, and the rebellion is crushed with overwhelming force. But something fundamental has changed. The Lords might have won the battle, but they have lost the war. They have seen the power of a unified populace, and they now know that their control is no longer absolute. The old system, based on an unquestioning submission of the serf to the Lord, has been exposed as a fragile illusion. Historians still debate whether these revolts were a genuine attempt at social revolution or simply a series of desperate protests for economic relief that were eventually co-opted by radical leaders. But for you, the survivor, the answer is clear. You have seen what you are capable of. You have felt the power of being able to choose your own path. And you have heard the voice of a new, revolutionary idea. The old world is not just dying. It is being torn down, piece by piece. And even though the revolt failed, it has planted a seed in the consciousness of the common person that will eventually grow into a new age of freedom and opportunity. The plague, in its terrible, destructive wake, has ironically become the ultimate force for social progress. The old world is gone. The feudal system is collapsing. The art has become a grim, beautiful meditation on mortality, and the very concept of an all-powerful, benevolent God is being questioned. But in the midst of this profound upheaval, another more subtle change is taking place. The failure of all the old ways, the prayers, the bloodletting, the charms, has created an intellectual vacuum. The old medical theories of the four humors and the miasma, once considered immutable truth, have been proven disastrously wrong. And from the ashes of this intellectual defeat, a new, more rational way of thinking is beginning to emerge. You start to notice the change in the way people talk about the sickness. The learned men and city officials are no longer simply looking to the stars or to the wrath of God for answers. They are looking at the patterns of the disease itself. They notice that the sickness spreads in crowded places. They notice that it arrives with ships from distant lands. The solution, they begin to realize, isn't in a potion or a prayer, but in isolation. The instinctual act of fleeing the cities has given rise to a new, more organized approach to public health. The concept of quarantine, which you saw people trying to enforce in desperation during the first wave, is now becoming a formal policy. It is a mainstream historical fact that the port city of Ragusa, which is modern-day Dubrovnik, and later Venice, became pioneers of this new public health measure. The city councils began to isolate arriving sailors and merchants for a period of time on their ships or on a small island to see if they developed symptoms of the disease. The duration was often set at 40 days, and from this, the Italian phrase 40 giorni gives us the word quarantine. It's a word that is born directly out of the trauma of the plague, a new term for a new, pragmatic way of dealing with the invisible enemy. Beyond quarantine, the plague forces cities to grapple with a new reality: sanitation. The need to deal with the overwhelming number of bodies and the general filth of the city becomes an urgent, practical problem. City officials begin to organize better waste removal, to create designated burial pits, and to generally clean up the environment. This isn't because they understand germ theory, which is still centuries away. It's a pragmatic response to a problem they can see and smell. They realize that a cleaner environment seems to be a healthier one, a lucky, if accidental, step in the right direction. A quirky tidbit of this time is that the widespread use of aromatic fires and perfumes, which started as a belief in miasma, accidentally served a beneficial purpose. The smoke and strong scents had some mild antiseptic properties that helped to kill some germs, a fortunate side effect of their deeply flawed theory. The plague also fundamentally changes the education system. With so many doctors and scholars dead, there is a vacuum in the medical community. The old universities, which taught medicine based on the ancient texts of Galen and Hippocrates, are forced to adapt. New medical schools are founded, and there is a renewed emphasis on dissection and anatomical study. For the first time, doctors begin to look directly at the human body, not just read about it in old books. This is a difficult, hesitant, and slow shift, but the seeds of modern medicine are being sown. The need for a better understanding of the disease has forced the intellectual world to abandon its old dogma and to begin, however crudely, to observe and to reason. Historians still debate whether this new emphasis on observation was a genuine intellectual revolution or simply a series of practical, pragmatic steps born of desperation, with the true scientific revolution still centuries away. The truth is that the plague, in its brutal, destructive wake, forced people to ask new questions. The old answers had failed, and in the search for new ones, a new, more rational way of thinking was born. The world you inhabit now is not just emptier and more equal, it is also, in a small but profound way, wiser. You have survived, and you are a witness to the hesitant, difficult birth of a new age, an age that will one day understand the invisible enemy that almost destroyed your world. You are now a witness, a survivor, a living link to a world that is now a memory. The plague has receded into a cyclical, manageable threat. The world has changed so completely, so irreversibly, that you often feel like you are living in a different time entirely. The grand, sweeping story of the Black Death is not just a tale of death and despair. It is the story of how an entire civilization was forced, by a force of pure nature, to transform itself. The feudal system, which had defined your world for centuries, is now an anachronism. The economic power you and your fellow survivors gained, the freedom to choose where to work, the ability to negotiate your wages, are no longer temporary blips. They are the new, permanent state of things. The plague was the ultimate equalizer, and its destructive force gave birth to a more mobile and eventually a more equitable society. But the legacy of the plague extends beyond the economic and social. It is etched into your culture, into your art, into your very worldview. The images of the danse macabre, the constant quiet reminder of death's impartiality, are a permanent part of your shared consciousness. The fear of a world without God's love has given rise to a new, more pragmatic way of thinking, a hesitant first step towards the empirical observation that will one day become science. And the practical lessons learned from the trauma, the need for quarantine and better sanitation, are now the foundation of a new public health. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Black Death is widely seen as a key factor in the end of the medieval period and the beginning of the Renaissance, a new age of art, learning, and humanism that was born directly from this crucible of death and despair. The plague's legacy might even be written in your very DNA. A quirky tidbit of modern research suggests that some people today carry a genetic mutation, a small deletion in a gene called CCR5, which provides a level of resistance to certain diseases, including HIV. Scientists have hypothesized that this gene became more common in the human population after the plague because people who had this genetic variation were more likely to survive the bubonic plague. It's a fascinating, almost mind-bending thought that the terrible sickness that almost destroyed your world is now a part of what makes you human, a silent, invisible shield passed down through the generations. Of course, not everyone agrees on which of these changes was the most important. Historians still debate which of these factors, the economic, social, or intellectual, was the most significant catalyst for the massive changes that followed the plague. Was it the population crash that empowered the poor? Was it the crisis of faith that paved the way for new ideas? Or was it the sheer scale of the disaster that forced people to think and act differently? The answer is probably a bit of all three, a perfect, terrible storm of events that came together to destroy one world and create another. The plague is not gone. It will return again in smaller, less devastating waves for centuries to come. It will be a part of your children's and your grandchildren's lives. But the time of its overwhelming, world-ending power is over. It has done its terrible work. It has killed a continent, shattered a civilization, and in doing so, it has cleared the ground for a new world to be built from the broken pieces of the old. You are not just a survivor. You are a pioneer, a first citizen of a world that was born from death. The journey is over now, and the fires in the distance have all gone out. The sounds of the screams have faded, and all you can hear is the soft, rhythmic hum of the fan, a sound that promises a new, different kind of peace. The world you lived in, with all its terrors and its strange beauty, is now just a memory, a story told in the quiet of the night. It's a reminder of a time when the world was fragile, when death was a constant companion, and when the simplest act of survival was a profound act of defiance. But it is also a reminder that even in the face of the greatest darkness, humanity found a way to not only endure, but to change, to grow, and to build something new from the wreckage. You are a part of that story. The quiet courage of your ancestors, their resilience, and their ability to find a way forward are a part of who you are. The horrors are far away, and you are safe now. Just close your eyes, let go of the stories, and drift into a deep, peaceful sleep.